I'm the Assistant Diocesan Director of Ordinands and also the Deputy Director of Vocations in the Diocese of Southwark. There are broadly two aspects to my role. The Assistant Diocesan Director of Ordinands part means that I work with candidates right from the beginning of the formal process, of the discernment process, through to selection for training, and then I support candidates pastorally while they're at college, and also work with the Diocesan Director of Ordinance in finding a curacy for ordinands at that stage. The Deputy Director of Vocations aspect of my role is more strategic. I work with the vocations team and other teams in the diocese to implement the bishop's vision for the diocese, and particularly for me in relation to vocations. It's important for us that the people coming into ministry in the diocese represent the full diversity of our diocese in Southwark, and we're constantly vigilant to make sure that we create the opportunities and we support people, give them the confidence to come forward and to realise the full potential of their ministry that they're being called to. My own journey towards ordination, I started as a solicitor in Edinburgh and worked in corporate finance for a good number of years. At the same time, I was also volunteering as a Samaritan and felt that that held those different aspects of my life in balance. But over time, that balance didn't feel like it was quite there. And I spoke with people that I trusted and whose opinion I respected, and we began to explore what that might mean. And it was the aspect of service that came out of the volunteering as a Samaritan that really was driving me and helped me to begin to wonder if perhaps it's a more vocational role that I was being called into. And through lots of different conversations and a lot of time, I gave up my career as a solicitor and then started work in a church in London, and then again in a chaplaincy in King's College London, in the chaplaincy at King's College London. And from there I went on to Theological College. So it's been quite a journey for me, but it's not unusual for people to have quite varied journeys into ministry. So in a sense, everybody has a vocation, but some people have a vocation to a particular type of ministry. And that can be quite daunting. It sometimes takes a lot of courage to be able just to recognize that in yourself and then to be able to name it out loud. For people in that situation, if there's any sense of feeling called, then the best advice, I think, is to speak to people you trust. And once you begin to feel that this is something you want to explore further, the next person really to speak to is your vicar or your chaplain or somebody in that sort of role. And that's the person who can then take you into the more formal process. So I come from the Diocese of Southwark, and in our diocese, the first formal stage of the process is what's called a vocations forum. And in order to be able to attend a vocations forum, your vicar or chaplain or whoever will book you onto that. And that's a morning where you have time to meet other people and to reflect quite intentionally about what calling might mean in your life. A lot of people get a lot out of that, and some people get to the end of the vocations forum and think, no, this is not for me, and there's no sense that that's not a successful outcome. It's important that people discern exactly what it is they're being called to. But if people want to then continue from there to explore ministry, the next stage in Southwark is to meet with a vocations advisor, and then there's a few meetings with them. The advisor discerns themselves whether the person is ready to move on to the next stage. The next stage would be to meet with an assistant director of ordinance and to go much deeper into that sense of calling. It can be really quite a grueling process, but hopefully also quite a rewarding process. And from there, then it's into the selection panel, and that's run by the national church. So up until this point, it's been a diocesan process, but it's all feeding into the national selection process. And if recommended at the national selection process, then it's onto a theological college like St Augustine's. The national selection process is changing. From the autumn, there will now be a two-stage process, and this is different from what happened before. The new process begins with stage 1, which is a series of 6 conversations with 6 different advisors, and this happens either in a morning or in an afternoon, and I think can happen online as well as in person. And the stage 1 process doesn't result in any form of recommendation. There is a report at the end of that, but it's just advisory and goes back to the diocese. We then receive that stage 1 report, and it gives us an opportunity to reflect on where the candidate is in their discernment process and feeds into preparing them for stage 2. Stage 2 is a bit more like the previous process, where there's a couple of formal interviews, but this time, rather than being with one other advisor, one other interviewer, there's 2 interviewers and 1 candidate in each interview. So after the 6 conversations at stage 1 and the 2 interviews at stage 2, the candidate will have met up to 10 different advisors. And that seems to me to be a better way of doing things, because it means that there are far more points of view feeding into that final assessment of the candidate and whether they have the potential to be ordained and to then go in and to be going into ordination training. So that process begins in the new year, and we're doing a lot of work to get our candidates ready for that process. What's different about that as well is that instead of the criteria for selection that were used before and that a lot of people are familiar with, the way that candidates are being assessed is using 6 different qualities, and each of those qualities are then applied to 4 different contexts, or domains as they're called. So there's 24 different aspects that we look at broadly in order to assess whether somebody is ready to enter training for ministry.